Hey friends, tonight we're diving into one of the most bizarre corners of medieval life, the strange ways people entertained themselves. Spoiler alert, there were no smartphones, no Netflix, and definitely no escape rooms. So, what did they do? They raced pigs, wrestled for cheese, and even held farting contests as their idea of fun. It was a world where boredom and creativity collided in the most unexpected ways. But before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if you really enjoy this odd little world of storytelling. And don't forget to comment and tell us where you're tuning in from and what time it is on your side of the world. There's something strangely comforting about knowing who else is drifting off to this strange tale around the globe. Now settle in, let the day slip away, and let's step together into the quiet, quirky nooks of history. The sun, barely peeking over the hills, stretched like a lazy egg, casting a golden glow over a village whose name had long since been forgotten. Smoke billowed from crooked chimneys, twisting lazily in the morning air, while the mud in the streets squelched with a sound that made you question every decision that led to your bare foot landing in it. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster, wide awake, simply chose not to crow. Maybe he was suffering from laryngitis, or perhaps he'd come to a more profound realization about the meaning of life. After all, he'd watched the same villagers trip over the same bucket for 3 years. Maybe he'd had enough. Whatever the reason, the silence was thick, only broken by the sound of the baker's boy tumbling off his stool with a thud. He landed in a heap, muttering words that would make his mother faint, while rubbing his head and cursing the oven for existing. The bakery, warmed by the embers from yesterday's coals, smelled like sleep, flour, and a forgotten sock. A lump of dough sat stubbornly on the counter, refusing to rise, not from lack of yeast, but from sheer obstinacy. Behind the counter, the baker, an old man with arms like tree trunks and a temper to match, snored loudly, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding around him. Outside, the village slowly began to stir. A dog scratched its ear against a cart. A pig sneezed. A cow named Gertrude, half asleep, wandered into someone's laundry line, leaving a trail of disarray. No one seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't mind. On a bench near the well, 2 elderly women sat wrapped in shawls, exchanging opinions like ancient coins. One of them remarked that the sun was too bright and likely a bad omen. The other, more cryptic, insisted that the rooster's silence was a sign of someone's impending death, or perhaps it was a sign that someone had forgotten to wind the sun correctly. Her understanding of theology was vague, but she was sure goats were involved. Meanwhile, a boy with a mop of unruly hair and a tunic 2 sizes too big tiptoed past the church, cradling a bucket with a single fish inside. The fish, staring up at him, seemed to judge his every move. He was meant to deliver it to the reeve, but he was seriously considering eating it himself, scales and all. As he passed the tavern, a bleary-eyed man stumbled out, missing 1 boot, holding a chicken under one arm and a daisy behind his ear. The chicken seemed mildly alarmed. Meanwhile, the rooster, whose name no one bothered to remember, flapped his wings lazily from the blacksmith's roof. He observed the bakery mishap. He watched a child fall into a puddle and remain there, convinced that if he stayed long enough, someone would bring him a plum. The blacksmith's forge, still cold, was about to come to life with its familiar rhythm. The hammering would soon begin, along with the daily chorus of irritation. But for now, the village existed in that quiet in-between, neither fully night nor fully day. It was the liminal space of yawns, head-scratching, and forgotten chores. The cows looked confused, while the chickens whispered to one another. A goat, munching on an old boot, exchanged a gaze with someone's grandmother, who didn't flinch. Then, the cart arrived, its wheels creaking as it was drawn by a donkey who looked like it had lived through every sort of ordeal. The driver, an old man with 3 teeth and an infectious laugh, bellowed, "Good morning," as if it were a battle cry. No one replied, not out of disrespect, but because most hadn't yet consumed their first mead or mushroom tea and were still skeptical of such enthusiasm. Finally, with a flap of its wings, the rooster let out a sound that could only be described as a sneeze caught in the middle of a yawn, followed by a confused silence and an awkward shuffle on the roof tiles. A woman hanging laundry looked up and muttered, "About time," before snapping her sheet with such force that it could have served as a flag. Just like that, the village was officially awake. Boots were slipped on, aprons tied, bread shoved into ovens, and children were scolded for licking the fence posts. Somewhere, a bell rang, though no one knew why. Everyone assumed it meant something important, but it was the blacksmith who did the most cursing, while the priest rehearsed his sermon with a stick and a sheep who clearly disagreed with his teachings. By the time the sun had fully risen, the rooster had gone back to sleep, satisfied that it had done its duty. He made a noise, and people began to stir. The world, in all its absurdity, was turning once again. And if no one could pinpoint the exact moment the day officially started, that was fine. Mornings didn't arrive here. They stumbled in, lost a boot in the mud, and hoped no one asked too many questions. The first true scent of the day wasn't fresh bread or wood smoke, but the distinct, wet slap of old porridge hitting a wooden bowl, mixed with the unmistakable tang of breath that hadn't seen a mint leaf in some time. In a crooked cottage, the hearth crackled weakly, flames licking at damp logs that grumbled in protest. A woman with a single eyebrow and a remarkable lack of patience stirred a pot that looked like it had never been emptied. The porridge inside bubbled thickly, enough to support a spoon, but thin enough to slide off unnoticed. Her husband, shirtless and already sweating, sat hunched over a piece of rye so dense it could double as a weapon in another land. He took a bite, paused mid-chew not from joy, but from deliberation. Was this the same piece from yesterday, or had it been resurrected from last week's loaf? Either way, it tasted of dust and unresolved obligations. Next door, a young girl poured reused ale into a chipped clay cup for her grandfather, who swore it aided digestion, despite ample evidence to the contrary. The cup had a chip that suspiciously resembled the bishop's nose, a fact that the family often noted but never discussed with humor. Outside, other hearths began their morning chorus. Wood cracked, metal clanged, and somewhere a voice shouted, "Not again!" as a chicken was unceremoniously thrown out of a window. The rituals of the village had begun. Hygiene was more of a suggestion, a faint whisper, an idea that might be entertained if there was ever any spare time, though there usually wasn't. A man stood shirtless by the water barrel, splashing his face with such intensity that it looked as though he were trying to wash his very identity away. Another man, wiping his nose with the corner of a tunic that clearly belonged to someone else, moved with purpose. A woman scrubbed her armpits with moss, muttering something that might have been a prayer, or perhaps a curse, maybe a bit of both. By mid-morning, the market square came alive, not with money, but with bartering so convoluted it required 3 witnesses and a goat. A man tried to trade 2 turnips and a compliment for a slightly cracked pot. The pot's owner, unimpressed, demanded a better compliment. In the corner, children chased a wheel of cheese down a slope with such reckless abandon that it was unclear whether the cheese was the prize or the villain. An elderly woman judged them from her widow, but when no one was looking, she smiled. A minstrel arrived, plucking a lute so out of tune it made dogs bark. He sang about heroic frogs and a lost pair of trousers that had once belonged to a duke. No one knew if the song was true, but they listened anyway, because in a world where goats might be sacred, who's to say trousers can't be noble? And as the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows from the crooked homes and slanted fences, the village hummed with the soft madness of life. Life without clocks, without screens, without scroll-stopping distractions. Just moments stitched together by absurdity, ritual, and an unspoken agreement to let the world be strange. So as we drift away from this odd little village, where roosters forget duties, bread resists being bread, and people find meaning in nonsense, we're reminded history isn't just kings and battles. It's mornings like these. Porridge that bites back, goats with opinions, and talk of the sun's mood. Later that evening, after chores were mostly done, and ale mostly flat, villagers would gather in the tavern. Some to sing, others to snore. Someone would challenge another to a cabbage-spitting contest, a Tuesday tradition, and the village fool would recite love poetry to a bucket he insisted was his fiancée. No one questioned him. Buckets, after all, were good listeners. The fire would crackle, casting shadows on soot-stained walls, and outside the moon would rise like a pale biscuit in the sky. The rooster, now rested, would consider crowing again, just for irony, but decide against it. He knew better. The day was done. And maybe, just maybe, in places forgotten by time and maps, in quiet corners of the past, mornings like this still happen. Strange, slow, slightly smelly, and wonderfully human. So, sleep well, traveler. History will wait.